I'm speechless. Completely and utterly speechless. As my friends know, I'll often make jokes about Skyward Sword, bringing it up at random times like, hey, play Skyward Sword! Or, I can go on an hour-long rant about Skyward Sword. Of course, they tell me no, because who wants to hear me rant for an hour about a 9-year-old Wii game? But now, by decree of the spinner, I am obligated to, no, forced to, talk about this game. And I'm speechless. Because this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Hopefully, for once, my friends will hear what I have to say about this Wii game. Not only will they hear me, but they'll heed my words, maybe even play the game. So this is a shot I cannot waste. I will do my best to sell whoever watches this video on the quality of this game. And that is my promise. The Wii is a game console. Game consoles play video games. The Legend of Zelda is a video game series. Skyward Sword is a Zelda game for the Wii. I need a second. Okay. Let's take a look back in time and maybe give some context as to why I love this game so much. The first Zelda game I played was Twilight Princess for the Wii, and like many Wii launch titles, the game featured motion controls. But the ones in this game were really limited, seeing as it also had a simultaneous release on the GameCube. For young me, this was my only experience with Zelda, and I wasn't super immersed in the internet like I am now, so I wasn't very familiar with the other Zeldas. All I knew was, I wanted the next Zelda game. Now, seeing as my only experience with the series prior had been a game that featured motion controls, I was expecting the next game to be the same in that aspect. That was all I knew. The status quo had been set. So for my birthday, I received The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword a couple years after its release, and I loved it. That's all. The end. Thanks for watching, guys. Now this was almost that kind of video, and you know the kind. The kind where I talk about how Skyward Sword is some sort of underrated gem that gets undue hate. The kind where I go out of my way to prove that fan consensus is wrong. But no, because the perception of this game is a mystery to me. It has a 93 on Metacritic and an 8.1 user score. IGN gave the game a 10 out of 10. In preparation for this video, I searched the keywords Skyward Sword in r/Zelda and searched for hours, but found more posts asking why this game gets so much hate than people actually hating it. Was it possible that we as Zelda fans had all been influenced by the Mandela effect? That people actually loved this game, and we were just misremembering? I mean, every Zelda game gets hate in some capacity, but I'd been led to believe that this one was unique in that sense. Had I been led astray? Well, no, not quite. The game has gotten its share of hate, mainly centered around the motion controls and Fi, Link's companion. But still, Skyward Sword has undoubtedly been overblown by fans. It's just probably the most hated 3D Zelda. Go figure, right? Which isn't a bad deal. I mean, to be one of the most divisive games and one of the most critically acclaimed franchises ever, not really that bad. So in keeping with the theme of this series, we're going to stay positive. We're going to talk about what I love about this game, and we're going to distance ourselves from common criticisms, but not ignore them. Let's talk about Skyward Sword. One of the main complaints about this game is that it's too linear, and this is due in large part to the fact that Skyward Sword is probably the most story-driven Zelda game we've gotten. This game takes place at the very beginning of the Zelda timeline, so it establishes a lot of things that are pretty standard throughout the series. It's here we see the first Link, the first Zelda, the beginnings of Hyrule, and a load of other cool stuff. This game was made for the 25th anniversary of Zelda, so they clearly wanted to do something big. Sometimes I wish the game didn't have motion controls, not because I don't like them, but because they turn people away from a game that's otherwise great for Zelda fans. But now let's get into the real meat of it. If you ask me, this game features the best iterations of Link and Zelda in the series. There's never been a need for Link to be a super fleshed out character. He's always been meant to be a self-insert. That's why he's been silent, why you usually can choose his name, and why he generally doesn't emote much. But since Wind Waker, we've slowly been building towards a Link that's more of a character, and I think this game really hits it out of the park. We see him slowly develop from a lazy student of the Knight Academy that wants nothing more than to hang out with Zelda, to a hero ready to vanquish darkness. The whole game is a wake-up call for him, and Link has to learn to rise to the occasion. I think one of the best character moments for Link is very early on in the game when he meets Fi. He hears her talking all this stuff about duty to the goddess, and he doesn't care in the slightest, until Zelda's name is mentioned. Love him or hate him, I mean, my man is focused. Now, Zelda in this game is good for many of the same reasons Petra is good. Oh my god, it's Leafy. Skyward Sword Zelda is the only Zelda who isn't royalty, so instead of being born into a life where she's aware of some great importance she may have, one day she learns that she's the reincarnation of Hylia, and she has to grow into that. At the end of the day, she just wants to be a normal girl, but she doesn't get a say. Both Zelda and Link have to put aside what they personally want for the betterment of the world. But now let's talk about the real GOAT, my man Groose. Groose is such a good character, it's not even funny. He starts the game as this stereotypical bully type, but he's never portrayed as dumb. In fact, he insults Link by simply calling him lazy. He's ambitious, and he wants nothing more than to save Zelda, but his arc has to deal with him realizing that he's not the main hero. He goes from resenting Link in the beginning to being a close friend and ally by the end. Oh, and he invented the Groosinator. Last character I'll talk about is actually Fi. Yes, I actually like Fi. As a character, that is, not as a gameplay mechanic. I think her development was done in a super clever way. At the very beginning, she's a very robotic, hyper-focused being, similar to how Link is hyper-focused on finding Zelda. Yet over the course of the journey, Fi slowly but surely discovers more human emotion, and when it's time for her to say goodbye, you can't help but be a little sad. Amidst the annoyances, you slowly grew to care for her. Fi's character development is derivative of the game itself, and when it's over, you can't help but be a little sad. Now, I don't believe that there is a quintessential Zelda art style, but I do believe that the best art styles work the best within the context of their game. Skyward Sword's art style takes some of the realistic aspects of Twilight Princess and trims it down with vibrant colors and silly designs reminiscent of Wind Waker. For a more lighthearted Zelda game like Skyward Sword, this makes perfect sense. I especially love the enemy and creature designs. The style allows for designs that look insane, with high detail, but at the same time never look uncanny. Like, I know that some of the stuff in a game like Twilight Princess is supposed to be creepy or uncanny, but come on. Are you serious? This game is also one of the most cinematic in the series. They were heading in this direction with Twilight Princess, but Skyward Sword takes it up a notch, making the most of the Wii with gorgeous locales and sweeping shots. The devs really went out of their way to make this game feel grand, even if it isn't the biggest Zelda game out there. As far as Wii games go, this is one of the better looking ones, up there with Super Mario Galaxy 2. And speaking of Super Mario Galaxy 2, let's talk about this game's music. Skyward Sword was the first game in the series to feature a fully orchestrated soundtrack, and I think this game is largely responsible for not only my love of orchestrated scores in gaming, but orchestras in general. The Zelda Philharmonic CD that came with the game has helped me fall asleep more times than I can count. although those are mainly orchestrated renditions of songs that appeared previously in the series. This game's soundtrack is just as great, if not greater, than that CD. It really uses the power of an orchestra to its advantage, with the whimsical, memorable melodies the series is known for, combined with a degree of epicness that only an orchestra can provide. Now, I'm not a music critic, so the best way for me to show you what I mean is to just play snippets from the songs. From the triumphant highs and lows of Ballad of the Goddess, to the calm, mellow tracks, to the excellent use of leitmotifs, to the sweeping, epic melodies. No matter how you slice it, it's clear that Skyward Sword took full advantage of the orchestra, much more so than Breath of the Wild. And that isn't to say that the Breath of the Wild soundtrack is bad. It's great, even. It's just that ambient tracks don't showcase what an orchestra can do. So if you ask me, this game's soundtrack is a masterpiece. If I were to make a video praising Skyward Sword and ignore the gameplay, I'd be doing the game a disservice. The most striking thing about the gameplay is, as the title would suggest, the sword controls. The sword is one-to-one, so the movements you make with the Wiimote are directly mirrored by the sword in-game. This allows for some of the most dynamic combat in Zelda. The game forces you to attack from specific angles to take down certain enemies. It's a simple concept, but the fact that you have range of movement and can attack from almost any angle gives the combat so much depth. I especially like this game's bosses. Well, except for the imprisoned. I don't like the imprisoned. But generally speaking, the bosses have a way of making the most of the game's controls, because they're designed in a way that force you to be somewhat precise with your movements. One of my favorite bosses is Galactos, and while he's far from the most complicated or difficult boss, he's super fun, making you use the whip, and also wield giant swords that you can use to cut off his limbs. Bosses like Girahim also take full advantage of the game's motion controls, having you distract him by brandishing the sword in one direction and quickly swinging in the opposite direction. But hey, some people don't like motion controls, and that's fine. But it's undeniable that it allows for a unique combat that I would have liked to see expanded on in some way. In Breath of the Wild, there are all sorts of different weapon types, but there isn't a single one of them that gets close to the level of depth that this one sword has. Now, a lot of people criticize the game for being linear, but don't be fooled. First of all, tons of great games are linear, so this isn't much of a criticism on its own. Secondly, Zelda has always been linear. They just have ways of tricking you into thinking it's not. They tease you with wide open spaces and nuggets that leave you wondering, huh? How can I get here? The original Legend of Zelda is kind of like a Metroidvania game when you think about it. You can go in a dungeon, get super far, and then the game will tell you, you need this item to progress. But you don't have that item, so you leave, explore, and come back when you do. And while Skyward Sword is definitely more linear than the original Legend of Zelda, I think this aspect is still left intact. A good Zelda experience isn't necessarily about total freedom of movement and being able to go wherever you want. It's about the illusion of a grand adventure. I think that, personally, Skyward Sword pulls this off amazingly. Ever since I made my video on Final Fantasy VII Remake, I've been scripting my videos, and this is because I have a tendency to ramble. A lot of my thoughts end up getting kind of frayed and whatnot, so scripts help to make my thoughts concise. But this part of the video I didn't bother scripting because I figured there was no point. This whole time I've been using words to try and convey why I like this game so much, but there actually aren't any words that can properly convey that. The only words that I can really say are simply, play Skyward Sword. You know, it's coming full circle now, isn't it? But yeah, you gotta play this game. Nothing I say is a substitute for just playing the game. So yeah, play Skyward Sword. Do that. Definitely do that. Alright, let me get Nah. Nah. Wait. Oh.